Good afternoon, Ms. May. We're ready for your opening statement.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. I truly appreciate the time that all of you took to serve on this commission. And I appreciate the opportunity to participate in it. It has been one of the most reaffirming, encouraging processes I've been through in a while. I've had a great 2 weeks. Some of you I knew prior to this process beginning. Some of you I met during the course of the process, and some of you I'm meeting for the first time coming in the room. Therefore, let me give you just a little bit of background. I have been practicing law for 35 years this month. All 35 of my years have been in private practice. I have practiced law nearly every day for the entirety of the 35 years. I have written contracts. I've been involved in civil rights claims. I've done wills. I've done probate. I have represented plaintiffs in personal injury actions. I've represented defendants in personal injury actions. I've handled property claims. I've done workers' compensation claims for plaintiffs. I have done workers' compensation claims for employers. I've been involved in indemnity and contribution claims. I've handled a child custody appeal. I've represented a lot of small businesses, taking them from incorporation through sometimes sale of the business to sometimes repurchase of the business. I've done employment law, even did a little bit of, not an expert in, copyright law. I've done probate, and I've done a lot of insurance law, both on behalf of the insurance companies and on behalf of the insureds. I've argued cases before every level of the courts in the state of Iowa. I've served as an arbitrator. I've served as a mediator. I have taught school at Drake. I have taught a lot of seminars where I have every confidence I learned more than the audience did. I've served on the Iowa Racing and Gaming Commission. It's a position that I accepted approximately 30 days before they passed the riverboat gaming legislation. Therefore, in the context of that role, my fellow commissioners and I had an opportunity to write all of the regulations that deal with riverboat gaming in the state of Iowa. And in fact, since we were the first in the state, that then became the model as other states adopted it. Also had an opportunity to become involved in and work on the regulations and the case law that dealt with the ability of the Iowa Racing and Gaming Commission to maintain the integrity of the industry through its exercise of authority. And the profession has permitted my husband Tom and me the opportunity to make a living and support 3 remarkable daughters. Some of my clients have been with me for 35 years. So why am I here? Well, there are several reasons. One is I not only love my clients and my partners and where I practice and how I practice, I love the law. I love how it fits together. I love how it's able to create resolutions and order society in many regards. I love the opportunity the Supreme Court has to not only articulate what the law ought to be, but hopefully to provide a mechanism to clearly define it to reduce the conflicts in the future. That's the work of the Supreme Court. However, like a lot of the candidates who have appeared before you, I think the events of last fall were a real eye-opener for many of us. And I'm not just talking about the results of the election. I'm talking about the conversations and communications that preceded that election. To hear how divergent people's views were about the judicial branch. And I'm talking not just people who are not lawyers, but I'm talking about lawyers as well. It astonished me. I obviously hadn't been listening very closely. There was a real disconnect between my perception of what the judicial branch was and how it functioned and what a number of other people viewed. So you can argue it's a sign of the times, right? Nobody trusts government. That's a ramification. But I think it's more than that. I think there have been several changes in the practice of law and in the relationships among the branches of government that have affected that. Let me give you an example. When I first started practicing, I'd skip out, and I'd go over to the Capitol, and I'd sit there and I'd listen to Supreme Court decisions, having them. The arguments were fascinating, the questions from the court were fascinating, and I'd just listen. But then I watched an interesting phenomenon. C. Edwin Moore was the Chief Justice at the time. His work didn't end when the arguments ended. You'd see him prowling that entire Capitol building, talking to legislators, talking to the aides in the executive branch. There was a familiarity, and the familiarity led to a trust, and the trust led to a recognition of a shared goal in creating a very, very positive, cohesive government structure. Now they're there, we're here. There is quite literally both a physical and a philosophical gulf between that building and this. However, we can bridge it. It's more than that, too. When you look at the structures of the legislative and executive branches, there are natural connections that occur in the legislative and executive branch between them and their constituencies. They have lobbyists in the door. They're talking with them all the time. There are always fundraising activities go on. There are town hall meetings. When does the public interface with the judicial branch? Well, maybe when you go down and pay a traffic ticket, not exactly what one would call an upper. You have a circumstance where you have two civil litigants battling through the judicial branch. One of them's going to lose. Half of them aren't going to be happy. You have family law situations and dissolution situations where probably nobody's going to be happy. You have criminal law circumstances, another less positive interface with the judicial branch. And then you have the juvenile court system that challenges the ability of the law to overcome societal and personal challenges. None of those are particularly positive interactions. Then you get to a more complex matter where the judicial branch really has two functions. It is charged with hearing and deciding cases. It is also charged with the administration of the judicial branch. If you look at the first of those two functions, it is necessarily independent. It is necessarily apolitical. If you look at the second function, it is extremely political and requires communication with other branches of the government that are completely necessary in order for it to function well. It's based on communication. There has to be a lot of communication. Now, it's absolutely true that the distance from the Capitol to the judicial building is the same whether they make the trek or we make the trek. I suggest we make the trek. I think it's time for doors to be opened affirmatively and to move forward. You look on the website. I found the information with regard to the Judicial Council. I found the listing of names. I was unable to find the minutes or exactly how it had been functioning. Did you know that the Iowa Supreme Court already has a public outreach committee? As a matter of fact, some of your applicants are on it. Who knew? The fact that we didn't know is to some extent a shame on us, and to some extent reflective of the obligation of the Supreme Court to do that better. Then I get these calls like, okay, I looked at the calendar of the Iowa Supreme Court for 2011. They're going to hear cases 13 days in the year. What are they doing the other 49 and a half weeks? Those are the kinds of questions that arise and that I think need to be answered in order for people to understand the operation of the judicial branch. A continuing theme I hear, we need to educate the public. We need to educate the public about what the function of the judicial branch is. I agree, but I think it's a two-way communication system. I think it is a great opportunity for us to be educated in terms of what the public perceives us to do, to hear their suggestions, how we might be able to do our job better. Very, very much a two-way street. And we have to speak more often. Quite frankly, when there are attacks on the judicial nominating process and there is no comment from the Iowa Supreme Court, the entire judicial branch is silenced. I think it's a great time and great opportunity for the Iowa judicial branch to come out of what has been a time of turmoil stronger, better, more responsive than it has ever been, and I want to be part of that process. In concluding, I just want to tell you about a great event that my husband and I went to last week. Our oldest daughter was sworn in as a member of the New York Bar, so we were in Albany. And I came home with a program as a memento because I'm a mom. You know, it's our job, it's what we do. More than that, however, there is a great quote in here that I want to share with you. And it comes from Louis Brandeis in a public interview in 1911. And it says, "Young men and women who feel drawn to the legal profession may rest assured that they will find in it the opportunity for usefulness, which is probably unequaled anywhere." After 35 years, I still believe it. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions from the right side of the table? Professor Cochran.
Ms. May, thanks for appearing today. Looking over your materials, I see, as you mentioned, you were on the board of the Iowa Racing and Gaming Commission, and now you some of your practice is devoting to gaming law and representing countries that have gambling operations in Iowa.
Yeah.
There's some folks in communities like mine who, when I talk to them, will say the gambling industry has too much political power in the state, especially things like smoking regulations and so on. Do you think that's true? And if so, does that extend to outsized influence within the courts?
I think the regulations that you're talking about are legislative, not judicial.
Right. In other words,
Yeah.
does that political power extend to the courts? And if so,
Not in this decision-making process. I think the entirety of the credibility of the Iowa judicial system lies in the independence and the freedom from that political influence.
Any other questions from the right side? How about from the left side? Mrs. Redenbaugh?
Yes.
Ms. May, thank you for putting your name in the pool of nominees, or candidates, I should say. Thank you.
Yes.
You talked about the disconnect of the three branches of government and the public comment even before the decision came down that was so unpopular. I didn't hear you addressing any disconnect maybe in the judicial system itself, the courthouses in the state. And I'm wondering if you'd talk for a minute about your experience in those courthouses in Iowa, and your experience with the stakeholders, the lawyers of Iowa, the district judges, the litigants, the staff in those courthouses, and if you know of any discontent there.
I do, and there is. This is a system under pressure. I don't think there's any question. I used to walk in the Polk County Courthouse, and there was such a great feeling of camaraderie among the members of the bar, among the judiciary, between the judiciary and the members of the bar. Certainly, the economic strain has been significant. And it is my hope that the communication between and among all of those levels and all of the users of the Iowa Judicial Branch will improve and continue to improve. I think it really needs to. You know, if you look for assistance when, okay, cutting costs. Who's going to know better than the guys on the front line? Who's going to know not only come up with suggestions for cutting costs, but what the impact of the various options on cutting costs are? They're critical in this process. They are a key source of information, and I would hope that their input, their feelings, their recommendations would be significant and considered.
Any other questions? Mr. Cook?
As you know, we're charged with finding the best and the brightest to hand over to the governor.
You are.
And I'd like to make a comment about your application and have you comment about it yourself. I suppose, first disclose we're neighbors and that you previously worked for a client I presently represent. Having said that, you have a very impressive application and work history, and share with the lay people what it means to receive 11 AMJUR awards. What is that about?
An AMJUR award, it denotes the highest grade in a particular class. So I don't know how many courses you take in law school, to be honest with you, but that would mean that of the courses we took, I received the highest grade in 11 of them.
Thank you.
So that's about it.
Any other questions?
Justice,
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Brody.
we've had a good chance to visit last week,
We did.
and so I'm going to start off with my normal way of starting it when I meet somebody like you, notwithstanding your Husker background. Because I made my normal Husker joke, and she immediately defended herself right off the bat. So
I did.
She's proud of that.
Well, you were wrong. I mean,
Proud of that. I don't know why, but she's proud of it. And then, with Mr. Cook's recognition of your academic and legal work, so how do you think you will be able to make the jump from, and I'm oversimplifying it, but from an advocate role to where you're making decisions, especially from the administrative side, especially from the outreach side, especially from the adjudication side as well? And can you give me examples of where your experiences in the past will bring direct benefit, service to the Supreme Court, especially with all the challenges that you laid out very, very well?
I think there are three particular aspects that come to mind. One is I have served as an arbitrator, which is in a decision-making role. Two, when I worked for the Iowa Racing and Gaming Commission, we had contested cases come before us, and those were adjudicatory in nature. They were not advocacy. The third thing also relates to work with the Iowa Racing and Gaming Commission. With the rather unexpected passage of the Iowa Riverboat legislation shortly after I thought, I can do this job, there are only 3 dog tracks in Iowa, it became a hotbed of controversy. And what I discovered is the fastest way to ensure that the fires burned even hotter was to ignore any element that had an interest in it. You listen to everyone. You listen to the anti-gaming people. They have legitimate concerns. You listen to the various communities. You talk to the mayors. You tell them what aspects you're obligated to look at under the code. You talk to everybody. And a number of the anti-gaming advocates are actually, I consider, friends. Reverend Carlos James, who advocated against gaming for years, provided wonderful information over sustained periods of time. I don't believe it is necessary to agree on every issue in order to communicate effectively. And what I learned is I needed every one of their views in order to make the best possible decision.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Ms. Dixon?
Good afternoon, Ms. May. As an Eastern Iowa lawyer, I've received a lot of input from my side of the state on the issue of geography. And if you could just address that issue and talk about why your qualifications as a Des Moines lawyer, how that fits into the concerns that I have.
I don't consider myself a Des Moines lawyer. I consider myself an Iowa lawyer. We are not admitted to the Des Moines bar. We are admitted to the Iowa bar. I think if you look at, perhaps the best indication is I was in Albany on Thursday, as I said. When I came back, I didn't know that my name had hit the paper yet until I got online and discovered I had 87 emails from friends or former clients or the former receptionist at the Racing and Gaming Commission, all of whom were calling to say, what can we do to help you? And those emails came from Cedar Rapids, Davenport, Dubuque, Ottumwa, Council Bluffs, Storm Lake. I think we have much greater commonality, in part because of the communication methods, and in part because we all practice in each other's home jurisdictions anymore. However, I find it interesting that remains a significant concern, and because it does, it obviously is one that needs to be addressed or just at least talked through.
Any other questions?
I have one.
Go ahead, Steve.
I'll try
Oh,
to be
Mr.
brief.
Pace, I'm sorry.
Ms. May, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I see that you were on the Iowa Environmental Council,
I have a,
and I didn't hear in your list of things that you had done environmental law. I happened to do that. I was listening very carefully to see if that came up. But when I see that you're on the Iowa Environmental Council, you obviously have some interest in
I do have
environmental law
some
in some way.
interest.
How did you come to be involved with that organization?
I'm a relatively new member of the board of that particular organization, and it actually became involved because of the son of one of my former partners, Bob Riley. And Bob Riley Jr. is extremely active in that particular organization. The Environmental Council is primarily an educational and coordinational organization for a variety of environmental interests. And I got on it because I recognize that if I'm going to get my kids back here in Iowa, they need to breathe and they need to drink safe water. And I think it's an interest that we all share.
Thank you.
Any others? Ms. May, thank you very much for appearing before us today, and we wish you the best of luck.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.